Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Cindy Bass, previewing her fall council plans and also walking us through her candidacy for the city council presidency. And our own Lance Haver will provide an update on SEPTA's bus revolution. Lance, how are you tonight?
All right, enjoying the end of the summer.
And we definitely have updates on the bus revolution that literally just occurred within the last hour. So that's
right.
something we'll be talking about that. Oh, I think I cut Lance off. Okay, so we'll be talking about that after our interview with Councilmember Cindy Bass.
Until we have the interview with Councilwoman up, what Larry was talking about is that SEPTA has changed their entire webpage. This afternoon, there was no new proposal. When they're going to be published, how is the public going to attend it? We didn't know what was going to be discussing, and we never got an answer. But instead, they member Cindy Bass interview that Larry and Denise gave first, and then we'll talk a little bit.
That's good.
All right, Councilmember Cindy Bass, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So the first thing I'd like to ask you about, you have thrown your hat in the ring for council president. Can you tell us a little bit about why you made that decision and what you think you bring to that discussion and that leadership position?
I think the council presidency is an extraordinarily important position in the city of Philadelphia. It really does provide that balance when we think about the three branches of government, and it's the leadership that provides that balance. And so, a number of my colleagues who are senior members, along with myself, have, pretty much every senior member, which is not a lot of us, has indicated their interest in leading this body. And I think that it's a testament that we've all been paying close attention. We all have our own ideas and thoughts about how we would govern and what kind of things we would like to do and things we would like to see. And I think it's good. I think competition is good. I think it breeds the best results for community, for people in general who want to see more in their communities. And I think that this can be something that's really going to be beneficial to all neighborhoods, all community members, all citizens.
What makes a good city council president? What are those traits that people should be looking for?
I think honesty, leadership, being forthright, plain spokenness, and having a significant understanding of the operation of city government, understanding the budgetary process, how it works, what happens, understanding the needs of the members, whether you're an at-large member or you're a district council member, because they have different needs. Having an understanding of all of those things, and fundamentally really having an understanding and keeping a pulse to the people who have an idea and have a say in what they like to see, understanding and hearing from them that this is what I want, this is what's concerning to me, what are you going to do about it? I think that this council body has taken, listen, since I've been there under the leadership, Council President Darrell Clark, I think that we've taken significant leadership across the board in pretty much every area that people have reached out to us and said that they have concerns about. When we talked about jobs, the council president was a leader in terms of figuring out, okay, how do we get, more people into jobs? Almost everything that he did was wrapped around making sure that there were jobs for people in the neighborhood. When you think about, like properties and what folks needed around their properties, and like the big thing now was driveways and retaining walls, and that's something that I was talking about, from the moment I entered into council, particularly around retaining walls, because that wall at the end of the driveway that you don't know it belongs to you, and if it collapses, most people are completely unaware that this is a financial burden that they are required to undertake. And so we've done a lot to educate folks and also to help folks and provide the resources. A lot of seniors are represented in this group who don't have the funds for, let's say, a new driveway or for the repair of a retaining wall, or for some of the other basic needs that some other folks in different areas of the city might take for granted. But we have to make sure that we reach and touch every person, and that we have the ability to do that. I think is important for any council president to understand and to ensure.
Right. You are the chair of two major committees on City Council, the Parks and Recreation Committee. And can you tell us a little bit about what your priorities for those committees are going into the fall?
Certainly. Parks and Recreation is a committee that's near and dear to my heart. It was my first committee coming on a city council. And when you look at the park system, you recognize that these are public amenities. This is what taxpayers pay for. And they have an expectation of better services from our Parks and Recreation system. I was in several centers this weekend for different events, and I have to say I wasn't happy. And so, I know that a lot of our citizenry is not happy with the playground and the public amenities in their neighborhood. We thought that rebuild was going to be the catalyst to really move it to the next level, and that just really hasn't happened. And so one of the things we intend to do over the fall is to go back and double down with hearings on rebuild and ask those questions. What happened? How do we get this back on track? We have, I think rebuild has something like 70 or 80 projects and something like, 6 or 8 staffers. That is never going to happen. These projects are never going to happen. They're never going to be fully implemented. So that the people of these neighborhoods that really depend on our Parks and Recreation system, so that they have the community amenities that they really do deserve as taxpayers. It's totally unacceptable to walk into a rec center with failing equipment, with glass on the ground, with shoddy workmanship, where the lawn's not cut, where there's trash everywhere. I mean, just some stuff that's really ridiculous that really could be taken care of with a broom and a shovel, or just a little bit more maintenance and care. And if we need to hire more maintenance folks, then let's do that. It's not to say that the maintenance folks that we already have don't care. The question is, do we have enough of them? And do we have enough so that we don't have to spread them around so thinly that they're trying to do 10 centers, within a week, which again, is just never going to happen. So these are some of the concerns that we hear about, some of the things that we're going to be working on going into the future, looking at the care, the quality, and the concern around our recreation centers and facilities here in Philadelphia and the rebuild program, and what we can do and what we need to do to move along faster. I'm certainly hopeful that the next mayor is going to keep the rebuild program, and not only keep it, but add additional resources into it so that it really works in the way that it was sold. Because if you remember, this was a program that was sold to the citizens as part of the soda tax deal. And although soda tax doesn't directly fund rebuild, it does fund the debt on the borrowing for rebuild. And so that's something that we need to be paying attention to.
We hear about that a lot too. So it's good to see,
I know. I hear it everywhere I go. and it's real, and people are frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
I get it.
So as an observer, I think it just seems to me this fall is going to be a little weird, right? Because we have Council President Clark, his last term in council, his last session.
Yes.
We have a new mayor coming in. We have people like yourself looking for running for council president, and we have an election. So there's all these things happening this fall. As a council member, how do you approach that? Is it a different approach? Is it just doing things the same way? How do you look at that?
I don't think it's weird at all. Council is weird. It's a very unique body. There's always something going on. There's always something changing and new. And you just have to be, as an individual, a member of council, you have to be ready to pivot at any time. You have to be ready to, change course. You have to be ready to, adapt to whatever the new circumstances are. Nobody saw COVID coming. I remember being in a press conference a week before we shut down. And I remember saying, listen, we got this, like we're going to weather the storm. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to go out for like 2 weeks is what everybody thought. And we'll be right back. We'll be back at it. Nobody saw what was getting ready to happen, but we were able to navigate it, I think, fairly successful. And I'm looking forward to going back fully in person as a body with caucus meetings and conversations, in public and around our committees, our committee hearings back in public with public input. I think we all know what to do and how to keep ourselves safe now. And so these are things that are very important, again, to the citizens of Philadelphia. And, operating in a way that recognizes that we have to be able and ready to pivot at any moment. And able to do that, it makes all the difference.
All right, I'd like to bring up Denise Murray here on Philadelphia Homeowner.
Hello, council member. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. How are you, Denise?
I'm good. As you've
Can you hear me? Am I?
Oh no, I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can hear you, but there was a pause, so I just wasn't sure if I froze or.
Well, there's been a little bit of that, but we're good.
Okay.
As one of 5 people who is running for city council president, what is it that you bring to the table that the other 4 candidates do not?
Well, I think that, listen, when you look at all the other candidates, right, we all have a certain level of experience. We've all been there with the exception of one of the 5. Well, actually, no, let me go back. So 3 of the 5, myself, Councilman Johnson, Councilman Squilla, have been there. This is going on our 4th term. One is on their 5th term, and another is not quite on a full term yet, but just is a newer member of Philadelphia City Council. And, we all have different levels of experience and things that we bring to the table. I think that what I bring is, I think, really what folks are asking for. They're asking for a level of, as I said earlier, plain spokenness. Just give it to me straight. What's happening? How's it happening? What are we going to do about it? And I think that that's one of the qualities that I offer. And I'm not saying that my colleagues don't, but I think that I'm sort of known for that. I'm sort of known as a straight shooter and somebody who, really doesn't hold back. I think that times like these, challenges like these, really do demand responses like that. And I think that that's one of the things that really makes me ready to go on day one.
What do you see as the city's biggest challenge? And how would you, as city council president, handle that challenge in connection with the mayor's office?
I think that the biggest challenge right now is a combination of the things that are happening, but it really all boils down to the fact that people feel that city services don't work. They feel that no matter where you call, what department, what part of the city you live in, people don't feel that our city government is really in action as it is. And I know, as a city employee, that we're working nonstop, grinding out. The question is really do more. How do we do better? How do we make people feel that this is things are happening in the way that they want to see them happening? That there's no part of the city that says, I don't feel safe. I feel like, I don't feel like my trash gets picked up. I don't feel like, the neighborhood loitering on the commercial corridor, in front of certain stores, open late at night. I don't feel any of those things. None of those things make me feel safe in my home. And so your home is an extension beyond just the house you live in. Your home is your neighborhood. And so how do we make people feel that, city government is really coming to the rescue and escalating services in a way that hasn't been done and seen in a long time? That's really what the question is. And I look forward to working with whoever the next mayor is, to being able to work closely together to address those challenges. Because, whether it's crime or education or safety or, public services or, any of the things, the mental health crisis, people don't feel that overall we're well coordinated enough to be able to provide those services in a way that makes sense and in a way that is effective. And so how do we do that? And that's going to be something that requires the work of the council president and of the new mayor.
Okay, now running for city council president isn't like running for the mayor or for city council or for any of the other myriad of offices that we have here in the city. This is the ultimate in internal politics, because your colleagues have to vote for you to be city council president.
Right.
What does that campaign look like? I mean, or is there a campaign?
It looks like a whole lot of conversations. It's a lot of conversation. It's a lot of, talking to folks to find out what is your concern, what are your thoughts, how do you feel, what would you like to see done, and how do we work together to make that happen? Because really nothing happens with the council president without the total body, without the entire membership of Philadelphia City Council. So you need. It's not one member like calling all the shots and directing everything that's happening. It's really a decision of all 17 members to figure out, okay, like how do we work together? And I think that even among the members who are running, it's I think I would say it's a friendly competition. I would say it's a competition that is, at the end of the day, we're going to sit down, we're going to work some things out, and we're going to come up with a solution in terms of how to best run the city. But I have no doubt that this is a friendly competition. It's not something that's going to leave a negative impact or a negative scar on the citizens and overall on the council body itself, which can translate into, this person didn't vote for that person who won, and so we're going to have less services over there, or we're not going to do over here. Which I have to say, that never happened under Council President Clark. I just want to be clear under that. When he came in to the body, it was himself and Councilwoman Tasco, and some of us, chose Councilwoman Tasco, and some folks chose him. But you could never ever tell that there was a difference in who selected whom. It was okay. It's January 1st, 2012. We have a new council president. We're starting off together. We're starting off together as a body. We're starting off together as to really address and fix the things that need to be done. And that's the way we operated then. I have no doubt that that's the way we're going to operate going forward.
Now, if you become city council president, you will be the first Black woman to be city council president. Mm-hmm. What does that mean to you, and what should it mean to Black women in politics if you manage to pull it off?
Well, I think it means a lot because it's long overdue. We've seen, just about everybody else. And so let's give this an opportunity to try to put a different spin, a different flavor, if you will, on what it feels like to have an African-American woman as council president and, in other leadership positions across the city. I think that it's long overdue. When you look at other major metropolitan cities, you see that their leadership has long had and included Black women, whether it's in the mayor's seat or in the council presidency, or in a number of other positions. So we're a little bit behind in that. I think that Black women lead, we've been tried and tested. We lead in our communities. We lead in our neighborhoods. We lead in schools and school districts. We lead in every other capacity. And so this is really just no different. It's time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time with us, and we really appreciate it. And I'm going to give you back to my co-host, Larry McGlynn, and you're still listening to Hall Monitor on 106.5 WPPM.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And council member, before we let you go, I just have one last question for you. Let's fast forward to January.
Sure.
What needs to happen early in the next administration to tackle violence and poverty in the city?
Well, the first thing that needs to happen is that there needs to be a solid working relationship between the council president and the mayor. I think that the two need to sit down, and I'm really looking back towards the old the John Street and the Ed Rendell model, which I think worked tremendously well for the city of Philadelphia. That was a partnership that addressed crime. It addressed, the feeling that the city wasn't working, which that was the feeling back then as well. It also addressed, looking at how do we make things better? How do we address what at that point was sort of like a dying downtown, a dying center city? Also, how do we figure out what to do in the neighborhoods? It really requires a very strong partnership among elected officials, particularly in leadership, to be able to get things done that need to be done. It requires listening. It requires doing listening tours and talking to different folks in different communities, along with their council members, and finding out what do you want to see? How do you think we should tackle this? And then getting down to work. I think that there are short-term solutions and there are long-term solutions. Some of our short-term solutions, I want to go back to former Mayor John Street, where things like NTI, where you saw thousands of cars, abandoned cars being removed from streets. You saw, houses that needed to be addressed in different neighborhoods that, made some neighborhoods look like almost like shanty towns. These are things that all needed to be addressed, and they were addressed almost immediately when he took office. And you also have things like Operation Sunrise, in which, I don't know if you remember that was like a drug enforcement operation in which it took down major drug gangs and cartels in different parts, particularly in sort of like the Kensington area. Seeing that later administrations really shied away from that, and we see what the result is in that neighborhood, and it has permeated in other neighborhoods as well, because we see other drug issues, other drug the level of addiction has skyrocketed, and you see more and more sort of like the corner boys in a lot of neighborhoods where we had seen that go away. You see it back now. And so these are some of the things, there's nothing wrong with going back and looking at what was done in the past and how do we make that successful again, and then incorporating that with some new ideas, some new ways of thinking about addressing drugs, violence, and crime in the city of Philadelphia. So I think those partnerships are critically important and will go a long way.
All right, Councilmember Cindy Bass, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
All right, we'd like to thank Councilmember Cindy Bass for joining us here on the show. And we'd also like to welcome our co-host, Denise Clay Murray.
Hi.
Hey, Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. It was good to hear from Councilmember Bass, and we're looking forward to what I still think it's going to be a very unique session this fall, starting in a couple of weeks. And before we get to Lance's piece, I just want to mention in 2 weeks, we're going to have our City Council preview show, and we're going to have some interesting guests for that show, I think, that people will enjoy. So
dancing.
Yeah, hopefully. So Lance, tell us a little bit about what's going on with the SEPTA bus revolution and where we are with this.
Just for background, let me try and explain. A number of years ago, SEPTA decided to hire an out-of-town consultant to come into Philadelphia and redesign all of the bus routes. Now, the out-of-town consultants did something that I think is very unusual, and that is they collected most of their data during the COVID shutdown. Now, during COVID, when most of the businesses were closed and all the schools were closed, the ridership was very different than what it is in a city that's open, in a city where people are working. The proposals that came out of the out-of-town consultants were really strange for most Philadelphians. One, they wanted to have many more transfers. Two, they thought people should walk much farther to get on a bus. And 3, they didn't understand or acknowledge that our school bus system is SEPTA buses. So they wanted to take away daytime service during the week and increase service during the weekends. And apparently they had never ridden a bus or a subway when the schools let out. Now, it is a difficult situation for SEPTA when, let's say, Saul High School or Roxborough High School, or even the schools like Central and Masterman let out at a set time, and you have literally hundreds of kids trying to get on a bus or a subway all at the same time. And the consultants hadn't seen that, didn't understand it, or ignored it, one of those 3. And so they came up with these proposals. And the proposals were to add many more transfers, were to take daytime rides away from people and add weekend rides for people. Many of the communities that were going to be impacted said, this is not what we want. And City Council, Councilman Johnson held hearings, and there were community meetings led by Councilman Jones and Ward Leader Lou Ager, where people came out, hundreds of people came out and said, you consultants don't understand what it's like for us to ride SEPTA. And part of what was the discussion was availability of SEPTA rides helps shape development. So if you take the rides away from a neighborhood, that neighborhood becomes less desirable. If you add rides and make it easy for people to ride, that makes the neighborhood more desirable. And there was really not an understanding that SEPTA is not just a commuter system. While it is a commuter system and it takes people to work, it's also our school bus system. It's also the way that many of us visit with friends and family, go to church, have doctor's appointment. It's a way that we get to work, and it's a way that stores get us to shop. So if you're not used to SEPTA and what SEPTA means to the Philadelphia area, it's very hard to look at it and understand why so many people opposed the initial recommendations. During the hearings, during the city council hearings, we found out that the consultants failed to meet with the school districts. They failed to meet with the community college. They failed to meet with the charter schools, and they simply hadn't met with community groups to get impact. So they were instructed by city council to go back and do more outreach. They did that, and they came up with a second proposals. And those proposals were supposed to be better. And then they had hearings on those. They had meetings on those. People came out and spoke. And again, they were roundly rejected by the riders. And the consultant said, well, that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to work. We're going to refine it, and we're going to have hearings on the elimination of close to 30 routes. And those hearings are going to be this September, starting on September 12th. But what they promised was to have all the new recommendations available in August. And as of this morning at 10 o'clock, those recommendations weren't posted. So they had scheduled hearings and asked people to show up and comment about proposals that people didn't know what was in them. Now, Hall Monitor published a newsletter about this. We sent a letter to SEPTA asking what they were going to do. And we told them we were going to air our show today starting at 6 o'clock. At 10 to 5 today, SEPTA changed their webpage and put up the information we asked for earlier in the week. And I have not had an opportunity to go through it, so I can't report on what those new recommendations are. But in terms of our questions, we still are unclear what the hearing process is. So let me back up again a little bit. Traditionally, hearings, there are two sides. Both sides are equally represented and both sides have access to the same information. At the SEPTA hearings, it's unclear who's going to be representing riders. It's very clear the out-of-town consultants, who, by the way, are paid millions of dollars to do this work, are going to be there with their lawyers and their experts, and they're going to tell us that this is what people want. But SEPTA has refused to release the raw data showing people's comments. So all we can do is rely upon the consultant saying, well, we looked through the data and this is what we think it says. there's nobody independent of SEPTA's bus revolution consultants who have looked at people's response and said, this is really what it wants. For clearly, an example of that is, what does it mean when the consultants say people want to have the bus running more often, even if it means they have to take a short walk? Well, I think that would be true, but maybe people want to know what a definition of a short walk is, because when you dig a little bit farther into it, their concept of a short walk is actually a half a mile. So I think if you said to people, are you willing to walk a half a mile as opposed to 2 blocks to get on your bus, even if the bus runs more often, is that something you're willing to accept? I think most people would say no. But we don't know that because SEPTA will not release all of the information. And the hearing process is supposed to be an opportunity to look at that, to have an opportunity to do what's called discovery, to ask questions about what does this mean. When the consultants say, well, most people are willing to walk a short distance if it means the bus will run more often, somebody should be able to ask, well, what is that definition of a short distance? When SEPTA says they're going to be eliminating 30 bus routes, someone ought to ask, did you tell the people who use those buses on a daily or weekly basis that their route was going to be eliminated? When you look through the proposals and you try and figure out what does it mean, it should be something that's easily understood by riders. Now, while it is absolutely true that there are many people who are struggling economically who have a vast education, it is also true that SEPTA serves a majority of the working poor in the city of Philadelphia. And unfortunately, there are a lot of us who struggle with some of the concepts that are amalgamations of different types of studies showing routes. So some of what they're publishing is very hard, at least for me, to understand what it means. And it's very hard to look at all these graphics and figure out what's going to happen to my bus route, what's going to happen to the routes that I ride. And I have to say that I wonder, if you don't have access to a computer and you're doing all this on your cell phone, how can you possibly know what's being discussed? And if SEPTA's unwilling to tell people that the new information is public and available, how people are going to be able to attend the hearings and know what's happening. So next week, I'm going to be able to look at what they posted today at a little bit before 5 and give a fuller explanation for what the actual proposed changes are. Regardless of what those changes look like, and many of them may look very good. I know that, for example, State Senator Saval was actively involved in making sure that South Philadelphia routes like the 45 were not eliminated. And I'm talking about the 45. For those of us who are old like me, the 45 is the extension of the 23. SEPTA decided the 23 was too long a route, so they broke it up into the 23 and the 45. That used to be the longest trolley ride in America. It's no longer a trolley ride, and it's no longer a single route. It's now the 23 and the 45. But the importance of the 45 for many Philadelphians, it takes people to both the 9th Street Market and to Reading Terminal. So those are 2 places where people who are struggling economically can find food at a very affordable price. And what SEPTA had decided to do was to cut the 45. In addition, the Academy at Palumbo is right there on the 45 route. So it would have meant that when the school let out, it would have been almost impossible for people to use the system. When the bus is full, no fault at the drivers, but when the bus is full, the drivers can't let anyone else on. They have to pass people. And so those are all the type of issues that Senator Saval got involved with, just like Councilman Johnson and Councilman Jones and other people got involved in to make sure their communities were protected. But nobody has had an opportunity to look at these new proposals other than SEPTA's consultants and maybe a handful of people at SEPTA. So nobody knows, and I'm not sure whether the consultants are going to send out an email to everybody who asks for information. Hall monitors on the list. We get all of their information. We know when the trolleys are going to be stopped. We know about the cuts in service. But we have not gotten any information, not a single email saying, the new information is now available. Here's where you go to look at it. What we have gotten is that there will be hearings, and they'll start on September 12th. We don't know anything about the format of the hearing. We don't know who the hearing examiner is going to be. We don't know if there'll be people who have the right to not only ask questions, but have questions answered. And we don't know on what basis the hearing examiner is going to make a recommendation. Is there some bar that they use? So does this have to be better than what existed? Or is it just acceptable for SEPTA's consultants to say, this is what we think we want, and therefore we're going to get it? And those questions really have to be answered before we know what to do at the hearings, before riders know what to do.
Well, it sounds unnecessarily complicated, as it often is in these cases. But when you say that they were thinking of cutting the 45, were they talking about cutting the amount of bus service that takes the 45, or cutting the 45 itself?
They were cutting back on how often it ran. So it runs now every 15 minutes. They wanted it to run every half an hour during certain times and every an hour during other times. The same thing was true for what used to be the C bus, which is now the 4 bus, which is the bus that runs up and down Broad Street throughout the city. They were planning on cutting that back. Now, again, Councilman Squilla, Councilman Johnson, State Senator Saval got involved in that, and SEPTA had to change that proposal. That is one of the few buses that actually makes money. So many people ride that bus that bus makes money. If you do away with it, the bus, and you make people wait longer, SEPTA cuts its own economic throat, because then people will stop using it and they'll either do something else or they'll go to one of the ride services. And that ultimately ends up hurting SEPTA. Now, again, in the original proposal, the consultants wanted to move everyone off of that bus. Again, the 4 bus now used to be the C bus. Move everyone off of that bus and get everyone to go down the steps to ride the subway. And there was no acknowledgement. It was that many people don't like the subway. And the subways, again, it's unfortunate, and it's a very difficult situation to know what to do with the people who are struggling using the SEPTA buses, the SEPTA subways, the Ls, as a place to live. And it's very difficult to know what to do with antisocial behavior on those subways. But it is ridiculous not to consider that that's very real. So not only are many of the SEPTA subway stops not handicap accessible, many of them that do have elevators, the elevators are really inhumane places. Again, I recognize it's a very difficult situation. I don't think there's a magic wand and we just wave it, and that we should simply blame SEPTA for all of society's ills. But we can't ignore that people who are struggling use those elevators as bathrooms. And it's
No, you cannot.
right. But that's when they say nobody should have to ride the 4 bus. Everybody should just get on the subway because it's faster. They are ignoring that. They're ignoring what people want. They're saying this is what's best for you, and we don't care what you want. Now, I know there are, for example, there are women who feel uncomfortable riding the subway. And as a man, who am I to say that their experience on that subway is not valid? If they say they feel uncomfortable, that there's not enough police protection, that the antisocial behavior, that the preying upon each other is to such a level that they feel uncomfortable waiting in those stations, I have to honor that and say, well, we have to think about that when we make plans. And the consultants said, no, those people are wrong. Some of it's almost funny if it weren't serious. They say, well, the perception of violence is much worse than the actual violence. So, SEPTA is not more violent than any place else in the city. So just because it happens doesn't mean you should be concerned about it. And it's kind of a strange argument. It is true that we are plagued with violence and we have a very difficult situation. I know there's a study out now that says 50% of us think that Philadelphia is unsafe. And I know that we open up the newspaper and we read about someone else was shot. And in places where we think that it would be safe, around the Liberty Bell, it's hard for us to accept that there are examples of gun violence in those places. But the solution isn't for SEPTA to say because the rest of the city is dangerous doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider that when you go down a flight or 2 flights of steps, wait in a smelly place where there's no visible police force for the subway car to come. I don't know how that makes any sense other than in a consultant who believes that their opinion is more valid than the people who use the system. So I think that's again what we're facing. And SEPTA is just this unbelievably wonderful institution. The majority of its users are the working poor. Majority of people who ride SEPTA are struggling economically. They go to work every day. They should make more money, but this is what they make. This is what the jobs pay. And SEPTA serves them. People who go to doctor's appointments, people who go to church or synagogue or mosque, people who want to visit each other, who don't want to have a car, and some who can't afford a car. I mean, there are some of us who don't want to own cars for societal reasons, for environmental reasons, but many of us can't afford a car. And if you're a driver, the one thing that you want to make sure is that SEPTA keeps going, because I guarantee you, if SEPTA isn't there, there are going to be literally tens of thousands of more cars on the road ahead of you, because people aren't going to voluntarily move to Alaska. That's just an unrealistic hope that poor people will disappear from the face of the earth if you do away with SEPTA. We are going to struggle, and we are going to find a way to try and survive. And for many of us, that means buying a car that's not dependable, that will break down when we're trying to get to work, or we're trying to get home from work to pick up our kids, and it'll break down in front of somebody's nice new car. And I don't care how fancy your car is. I don't care how comfortable it is. If you have 3 cars broken down in front of you, you're still not going anyplace. So SEPTA really helps the drivers tremendously as well. And this institution that serves us so well often gets treated as if it's not something that we should value. And when we have a chance to talk about the hearings, and next week we'll give a list of where all the hearings are, and it will encourage people to show up and be heard. But one of the fundamental questions we're going to continue to ask is, if they cut this bus, if the proposal is to eliminate this bus, did you put a poster up on the bus and say, this route is scheduled to be eliminated? If that concerns you, here's the hearing you can come to. And anything else, posting it on the webpage or talking about it in some map that has a slider on it that's very difficult to figure out what they're doing, is not sufficient. We know which buses they're proposing to cut. How hard is it to put a poster up on that bus and say, this bus is proposed, the proposal is to eliminate this route and to have this route instead. If you're concerned about it, come out to the hearing and let's hear what you have to say. Now, it is a difficult situation when you have a new route that nobody uses yet to say that there's not going to be any supporters for a new route. And that is absolutely true. Nobody knows it exists. Nobody has ridden it. Nobody has said, this is how I use it. But a concrete example is they're eliminating service through Olney. Now, Olney is a neighborhood that is struggling. The more access it has, the greater likelihood it is for people to want to live there. You know, we know as a society that there are certain things that make neighborhoods more desirable to live in. We know supermarkets, we know good schools, we know safe streets, we know clean streets, we know public transit. If you go to the real estate webpage Zillow, as troubling as it is to talk about that for various reasons, they'll list how much access there is to public transit. For people who are wealthier, there's a movement called public transit development. And you look at these things and you look at who's willing to pay $500,000, $750,000 for a condominium, and look at how close that is to a public transit site, and you'll see the importance of it. So when we say to Olney, we're going to eliminate the bus routes through Olney, we're saying that we're not going to have part of what makes a neighborhood desirable anymore. We're not going to have a Penn Alexander school because there are no colleges in Olney. We're going to eliminate more and more of your public services. As the council member talked about the parks, some of the parks in Olney are just not kept up. The Olney AA is a disgrace. It's been boarded up and for over a year and a half now. And who is going to think of Olney as a desirable neighborhood? There's no public access to transit, if the schools are struggling, if the parks are closed and the streets are filthy, and there's no workable supermarket other than the ShopRite at Jeff Brown's ShopRite at B in Olney. So those are kind of the things that the consultants aren't thinking about. They're focused on the neighborhoods where there's people want to live, where people want public transit. Saying everyone can walk a half a mile to get on a bus, well, everyone doesn't include people my age bracket and older, because it simply isn't true. It's simply not true that everyone in my age bracket can walk down to get on the SEPTA subway or walk up to get on the L. It isn't true that everyone in my age bracket feels comfortable and safe waiting in the subway stop for the subway. So it's obvious that they're not talking to people in my age bracket. They're not talking to people who are struggling economically. What they're really doing is talking to themselves, and they're saying, like the great line about economists. Economists, when you ask them why their projection was wrong, what they'll always say is, well, it's not that my projection was wrong, it's that people didn't behave the way they should have. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a consultant who says the riders are the problem. They're not behaving in the way that we want them to, or the way we think they should. They don't want what they should want. They want what they want. And what do they know? They're only the riders. And so we'll continue to look at this. We'll continue to monitor it. And I'm hoping that some of the elected officials who are instrumental in getting the changes, and they were, without them, without Senator Saval, without Councilman Johnson, without Councilman Squilla, without Councilman Jones and Ward Leader Lueger, the entire process would have gone through. Many more transfers, people have been forced off of the buses and into the subways. So I think riders should be very thankful that they stood up. But the process isn't over. And I'll make two more quick points and then turn it back to you. It is really difficult to understand why SEPTA is not waiting to hear what caused all of the accidents before they finish with these recommendations. It is troubling to think that if the cause of the accidents was the bus drivers are working too many shifts or driving too many routes, why we wouldn't want to put that into the quote unquote bus revolution. Why would we not want to whatever the problem is, and it may have been just an anomaly and an unfortunate number of coincidental occasions, but whatever the problem was, 7 accidents in less than a month is unacceptable. And we should at least wait to hear what the cause was before we decide how we're going to change the bus routes. And the second thing is, SEPTA has said that if they don't, this year's funding is fine, but if they don't get the funding in the way of new taxes for next year, they're going to enter into a doomsday scenario where they're going to have to raise fares by 30% and cut service by 20%. I don't really understand the wisdom of planning whole new bus routes when before they even get started, you're now talking about having to eliminate them. So those type of things, like what comes first, and again, if you're the consultant and you have a limited view of the world and all you want to do is tell riders what they should do and what they should want, you don't see the entire problem. And they continue to push this, but it may not make sense to come up with proposals until we find out what caused the accidents. And we may never know. I mean, again, it may be something which we say there were 7 accidents in 1 month. For the next 2 years, there won't be a single other accident. And maybe SEPTA will get the funding it needs. I certainly hope so. But until we know those things, why are we changing the bus routes? And what is the point of this endeavor unless we know we're going to have the resources we need and we're going to be able to solve the problem so the buses are safe. Very few people are going to want to ride if they think that the bus isn't safe. And I'll finish up the rest next week when I've had a chance to look at what they posted today. By the way, just as a slight insult, even though they posted it today at 10 to 5, they dated it yesterday. So it's just one of those things where you have to look at it and go, can't you at least acknowledge that you were wrong and that you should have had this stuff up? So day before the Labor Day weekend, they put up massive changes. And then the following week, they're going to have the hearings. I don't really know who they think is going to be studying it. Especially if they don't tell people that it's happening. And I don't know how they're going to tell anyone who doesn't have internet access how that the hearings are happening. And I don't know anyone who uses their phone for the internet, how they're going to figure out what any of these changes mean.
Yeah. Well, Lance, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on that. And we know there's a lot more to talk about next week and the week after. There's a lot more to this that we're going to be following, and thank you for doing that. You're the only one doing it right now that I can find. So.
Right. Very, very disappointing that the Inquirer is not covering this. Very disappointing. But
well, they're probably not going to look into it until people start calling them up and saying, hey, look, my bus. I mean, let's face it. I used to be a frequent traveler on the C bus before it was broken down into the 4 and the 15. All that did was make a very long, very slow bus route even longer and even slower. And it made it so that if you got downtown and you needed to go to the other end of Broad Street, you had to take a whole other bus in order to do that. And it's the same thing with the 23 and the 45. I used to catch the 23 from 11th and Oregon Avenue when I lived in South Philly. And I could go all the way down to the other end of 11th Street and be able to do whatever I needed to do. Now it's broken down into 2 very slow bus routes. And, you know, if SEPTA's concern is getting more people to ride the system, the last thing you should be trying to do is make it slower, more inconvenient, and just worse all around, especially since what you were talking about the subways. I'm fairly able-bodied and can get on, get up and down stairs, pretty well. But on those occasions where, like when I broke my leg and I had to take the subway, you had to hold your breath because the subway smelled like someone had been using it as a bathroom. And the thing is, you're not going to have somebody come in there and clean the elevator every couple of hours to make sure that that's not a problem. And you're not going to be able to necessarily keep people from sleeping on the subway line, because even when you go catch PACO from New Jersey to New Jersey, and you're in, the City Hall station, and you're walking to PACO via the Broad Street line, you still see homeless people there because they come in from the 15th Street stop, they come downstairs and they, get their equipment that they need to go to sleep, and they, go to sleep there. So, if you want people to take the subway, make it so the elevator is constantly clean. If you're not going to do that, then let people have their buses and let them go on their way. And another thing that kind of popped into my mind when you were talking about these out-of-town consultants, why not use local consultants? Why not use people who live here and who have an understanding of what the needs of the citizens, in the 5-county Philadelphia area are in terms of public transportation? And I think the reason why you don't necessarily do that, why you hire the out-of-town guy, why you pretty much ignored places like Albany is it's all a matter of gentrification. If you make it so places like Albany are so horrible that the people there sell their houses and leave, you can get that land for cheap. You can turn it into something else. And then you can, really make an effort to put mass transit in because it attracts the people you want and doesn't attract the people you don't.
Sadly, I suspect you're correct. But it's just hard to watch it happen when we don't have to do it. It is absolutely true that, again, part of gentrification is having access to public transit. The Chestnut Hill, and again, we're not talking about trains in the bus revolution, but the Chestnut Hill line and the lines that go out to the wealthier suburbs are critically important. We think at some point when many of the businesses require people to come back to work, that they'll be in greater demand. And if you look at the ridership curves, you see more and more every month, there are more and more people riding. Now, it may be that at some point Center City fails and there's no more businesses in Center City. But I suspect that doomsday scenario isn't accurate. I suspect that there will be more businesses coming over time, and that one of the things I think we're going to look at is which businesses continue to be creative, continue to advance, continue to have breakthroughs and ideas. Are those businesses where workers get together and have talks and meet and discuss, or are those businesses where the workers are isolated, stay at home, and don't have that type of interaction? And I think at some point the business schools, Harvard Business School, Dartmouth Business School, whichever business schools you believe are the elite, are going to be publishing studies like that. I know at one point there was this move to get corporations out of cities into the suburbs, and there were studies after studies that showed the corporations that left the cities for the suburbs were less innovative than the corporations that stayed in the cities and had people come and interact. To the extent that 3M is an innovative company, they have decided that it's critically important for their workers to actually get together and work and then take a break for at least an hour a day, do something other than work, and then go back to work. And that's their recipe for how they can continue to innovate. So I think we'll have that discussion in the next few years as the business community starts looking at which businesses survived COVID, which grew, and where is the new wave of businesses coming from, and where are these workers who are building it? Is it the ones who are at home, who are isolated and not having those discussions, or is there a value to having people get together and exchange ideas, even if the idea is what'd you do over the weekend, or did you see that show last night, or I had this thought and here's what it was. And we'll have answers to that, and I suspect we're going to find out the businesses that had people coming back to work are going to be more successful, and that means that cities like Philadelphia will start growing again, and the business community will want to be in Philadelphia, at least in certain parts of Philadelphia, and that's really the future.
All right, Lance, thank you so much for that. We're almost out of time here on Hall Monitor. So next week on the program, we're going to continue with our talk about SEPTA and our city council preview. Following week, we'll have Lance's review of the SEPTA meeting, Bus Revolution hearing, and we will have an all-star panel with us to talk about city council and what's coming up for the fall, which is going to be a very interesting fall session, I think. So we want to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll see you here next week on Hall Monitor.